Yes, you're welcome to Book Chat with Professor Christopher Smith. Today we have an assistant professor of modern Japanese literature at the University of Florida in Gainesville. He teaches courses on modern Japanese literature, Japanese culture, manga, and anime. His research focuses on post-war Japanese literature, particularly contemporary literature, as well as Japanese pop culture, including manga and anime. He's especially interested in examining how literature and culture presents, manipulates, and ultimately plays with Japanese history. It's examined through the lenses of nationalism, national identity, the historical legitimation of power, and postmodernism. He's published a translation of Tanaka Yasu's Somehow Crystal. He received his PhD in Japanese literature from the University of Hawaii at Manoa. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Dr. Christopher Smith, the assistant professor at the University of Florida. You're welcome to Book Chat.
Thank you very much.
Okay, so you can share the copy of the book we'll be talking about with the viewers. And while you're doing that, my very first question will be, which I'm sure a lot of people must have asked you, what inspired you to explore the theme of anachronism in Japanese literature, particularly focusing on the figure of samurai?
So it actually came from, I was kind of teaching. So ever since grad school, I taught a course on anime. And one of the things I always teach is a very famous manga called Hinotori, or the Phoenix. And I was reading it, as a very serious kind of deconstruction of Japanese history, right? Deconstructing the kind of state authorized received history. But my students in my class were always noticing, like, hey, what are these weird anachronisms, right? Like, what's going on with these? And so my answer was like, well, it's Brechtian alienation, right? He's just trying to alienate you from received history. But then, as I started thinking about it more and more, I kind of thought, well, maybe there's something more with these anachronisms. Like, what is going on? Like, what is the author, what is the text doing by putting, a telephone in the hands of a 12th century samurai? Like, what's the sort of narratological effect of that? And I started thinking more and more about it, and then I started seeing it kind of more and more. And then yeah. And then and then it started, the size of the project sort of got, the scope got bigger and bigger, and I realized, wait a minute, if I want to talk about anachronism, like samurai holding a telephone, or like a third century queen eating ice cream, or having an electric fan, like, these aren't the only kinds of anachronisms, right? There's also the insertion of sort of modern ideologies into the past, right? That's anachronistic as well. But that's not the kind of anachronism that is obvious and playful and funny. It's not, it's not the kind of thing that you notice right away, right? So in my book, I kind of try to deal with both these types, and I call them dialogic and monologic anachronisms. And so the dialogic anachronisms, I argue, these are things like samurai using telephones. They try to keep the past and present in dialogue, right? And so by being, humorous and obviously anachronistic, they force the reader to keep in mind, like, this is a dialogue between two different discourses on history. But at the same time, we can still put them in contact, right? Whereas monologic anachronisms try to force past and present to speak with a single voice. And so they try to rewrite history. And this is by doing things like, inserting present day kind of ideologies or psychologies, health regimes, right, into the past.
Well, like they say, one thing led to another, and the rest, they say, is history.
Yeah.
Well, let me take you on to my next question. How do you think that the portrayal of anachronistic samurai reflects Japan's struggle with modernization and westernization during the Meiji era?
Yeah. So I think that anachronism can be used for a lot of kind of different political projects, right? And so the samurai has this kind of the figure of the samurai has this kind of troubled history in Japan, right? Because in the kind of pre-war and wartime years, the samurai was kind of this figure used by conservative elements as like, you know, the model for Japanese masculinity, and particularly for the imperial soldier, right? The imperial soldier was the inheritor of the samurai. So the samurai has this kind of um, you know, interesting sort of image in Japan. It's far removed from the sort of the historical figure of the samurai, which was a caste in the kind of the feudal system, right? So what I'm arguing is that anachronistic samurai, or having, you know, samurai kind of associated with anachronistic things, is a way of it can be a way of both deconstructing the samurai, right?
Hmm.
But also reclaiming the samurai.
Hmm.
Um, and so yeah, you're right. There is this break, right, with Meiji modernization. The samurai caste is abolished, so now samurai are gone. Um, and but they're still sort of being used as this image of kind of ideal Japaneseness or ideal masculinity or something like that, right? So
Hmm.
how do we contest that image? How do we reclaim it? And one of the
Hmm.
ways that text can do that is by using anachronism, right? So, like for instance, I examine an anime that has people in the Edo period, right? So before modernization, before Meiji, in you know the time of samurai. It has, you know, in that time period, samurai and their characters are performing hip hop, right?
Hmm.
Hip hop in the 17th century, right? Obviously, it's anachronistic, but why, right? What's it doing? And so I argue the one thing is it's, you know, doing is it's deconstructing, right, the sort of the image of the solid, you know, Bushido following, you know, samurai that consumer culture loves. But then it's also putting that the authorizing, the legitimating figure of the samurai in contact with modern youth counterculture, right?
Hmm.
So both delegitimating the samurai, but then also sort of appropriating its legitimating powers for counterculture. So I think that's kind of how anachronism can play with the image of the samurai.
Well, I see that clearly now. Well, like they say, any research is a journey
Yes.
where you have a destination in mind, but along the way, you're likely to also branch and see some other things. In your case, did you find that Japanese authors use anachronisms intentionally
Mhm.
to make social or political commentary, or are they more stylistic choices that they had to make?
Um, so there are definitely some kind of stylistic choices, and there's some authors that are probably just not aware, right? I mean, there's always the possibility that an anachronism is just an error, right?
Mm.
Uh, or it's just, you know, it's just inserted because, you know, because it looks cooler to have some modern stuff around, right?
Mm.
Um, but I think a lot of times they are used intentionally, and even when they seem like it's just a stylistic choice, sometimes there might be more going on, right? So there's one famous example where this is in an Edo period work. So this is a work from the early 19th century, um, and but it's set several hundred years earlier, and in it the author in a preface apologizes for having a mosquito net in the text, and basically in his preface, because there were no mosquito nets at use when it's set several hundred years
Yes.
prior. And he says basically, well, it just wouldn't feel right, right? So it's like it's just aesthetic, right? But in fact, this is like one of the most pivotal scenes in the whole story. And he has it, you know, he puts this modern, you know, sort of artifact in this most pivotal scene. And so I think we have to read that a little suspiciously, right? Like maybe it's not just aesthetics like the author wants to claim, but maybe there's more going on. But then there are definitely others that are they're absolutely intentional, right? Like no one, you know, can believe that a 12th century samurai really picked up a telephone and called his brother, you know, on the other side of the island. You know, so when authors do things like that, or have, samurai, 16th century or 17th century samurai, doing hip hop, things like that, right? That's absolutely, doing something, right? There's a point to it. And part of that point is fun, right? So part of that point is definitely humor. There's always that aspect to it, but
Mm,
humor is never just innocent. And so there's also kind of play with history that's going on here, that I
mm.
think authors and texts are definitely purposely engaged in.
Well, there are many sides to a book. A book comes with its own stories, but somebody says until it comes in contact with the audience.
Mm,
And my question will be, how do contemporary Japanese audiences respond to these anachronisms in literature,
mhm,
especially with the modern samurai trope? Are
mhm.
they seen as subversive or nostalgic?
Yeah. Um, I think uh, I think audiences kind of respond well to it because it's fun, right?
Mm,
Or at least what I call the kind of dialogic anachronism. In other words, like samurai with telephones, things like that. It's fun, right? Like you
yeah.
see, it's like it's obviously out of place, and it like there's this instantaneous kind of counterfactual consideration of possibilities, right? Like, oh, I see this summer with the telephone, and I know that that's not real, but wouldn't it be cool, or wouldn't it be interesting, if they did have telephones back then, and how, maybe would that have changed history, right? So there's this kind of fun edge to it. I think there are definitely texts in which it is quite clearly subversive. So the one I was talking about at the beginning, this one I teach to my students, this sort of manga reconsideration of Japanese history. Uh, one of the chapters has a queen named Himiko, who's a very early queen of Japan, like prehistorical, basically, um, and who many people have associated, and in this text associates with the sun goddess. And the sun goddess in Shinto is the imperial ancestor, and so legitimates the whole imperial line, right? So, very important sort of fixture in the legitimation of state power. And this manga has her like calling for a fan, an electric fan, right? Eating ice cream. And also there's one scene where like her clothes change, right? Into like a Nazi uniform, and then a kind of a Napoleonic uniform, and other things like that, right? So anachronistically, certainly, but associating her all of a sudden with dictators, like with the modern discourse on dictators. And
Mm.
that's really subversive, right? Taking this holy figure, this legitimator of the imperial line of state power, and basically associating her with everything that we know in modern times about modern dictators, right? And then also depicting her as a sort of vain and weak person who like wants a fan and ice cream and stuff like that. Yeah, that, I mean, it's funny, but it is definitely doing something subversive.
Well, I know I would have loved to um, talk a lot longer with you on this, but um, time.
Yes.
And my very last question to you will be if you had like 30 or 60 seconds to promote or position this book within the academy.
Yes.
What are the kind of classes around the United States or in Japan that this book might work well with? If you were going to sing its praises, what are the things you're going to say about it? It's
Well,
your this is your trumpet. You
yeah.
got to blow it.
Okay, 60 seconds. Okay. Uh, so I think beyond Japanese studies, I tried to lay out a theory of anachronism that, my examples are from Japanese literature and culture, but I think the theory of anachronism itself is probably applicable across other kinds of literatures as well. And I kind of try to go to the sort of very basics uh, of anachronisms, developing a categorization based on how they interact with history, that, sort of the very base level categorization of anachronisms, that I think could be useful to any sort of study of literature. And then for people in Japanese studies, I have chapters on manga and anime. I have chapters on more textual literature. including some, kind of more pure literature, high literature authors like Mori Ogai and Oe Kenzaburo, and then also 2 chapters on Edo period literature. So there's something in there for everyone, right? So I have a theory of anachronism, and then I examine how anachronisms work in various different genres and mediums. Obviously they're involved in very, very different projects, but anachronisms are useful to those various projects. So there's something for everyone. That's my pitch.
Well, thank you very much. If you stop sharing, we will end it by saying a big thank you to you for coming on Book Chat, being our very first academic author to come on Book Chat. And we will definitely, maybe one of these days, be bold and brave to ask you to choose some nice excerpts that you would like to read to us, but that will be much later. On this note, this is how I draw the curtain on Book Chat with Professor Christopher Smith. Thank you very much for honoring the invitation.
Thank you for having me.